The breakdown on a desert road. The California sun blazed down mercilessly on the open stretch of highway that cut through the Mojave Desert like a ribbon of molten tar. Heat shimmered off the asphalt in waves, distorting the horizon and blurring the outlines of distant rocks and scrub. Keanu Reeves, alone in his 1969 black Mustang Fastback, a car he'd lovingly restored himself, squinted through the windshield, frowning as a strange noise came from under the hood. He glanced down at the dashboard. The needle of the temperature gauge was creeping past the red line. "Come on, not now," Keanu muttered, pulling the car gently to the shoulder. He killed the engine, then stepped out into the dry heat, the hot wind wrapping around him like an invisible scarf. He popped the hood and was greeted by a puff of steam. The Mustang's engine was old, yes, but usually reliable. Today, it had chosen the worst possible moment to quit. No nearby service stations, no cell reception, just the vast expanse of desert and a single-lane road stretching endlessly in both directions. Keanu took a deep breath, feeling frustration well up, but he stopped himself. He wasn't a stranger to bad luck. Life had taught him patience. He leaned against the side of the car, looking up at the cloudless sky, trying to think. Maybe someone would drive by. Eventually. Minutes passed, then an hour. And just as he was preparing to start walking to find help, he heard it. A soft rumble of an engine in the distance. A few moments later, an old Ford F-100 pickup truck rolled into view. It was faded green. The paint chipped in places, but it chugged along steadily. As it pulled over, a plume of dust rose around it like a protective halo. The driver stepped out slowly. He was in his 70s, maybe even older, with oil-stained hands, worn jeans, and a plaid shirt tucked into a sun-bleached belt. His face was lined with age and hard work, but his eyes were alert and kind. "You all right there, son?" the man asked, his voice gravelly but warm. Keanu nodded, offering a tired smile. "Overheated, I think. She's been running hot all morning." The old man walked over to the Mustang, whistled low. "That's a beauty. A '69 Fastback, right?" "Yeah," Keanu replied. "Tuned her up myself. Guess I missed something." "Well," the man said, rolling up his sleeves, "let's see what we're dealing with." For the next 20 minutes, the two men stood side by side under the scorching sun as the mechanic worked. Keanu watched as the elderly man checked the radiator, replaced a worn hose with a spare from his truck, and refilled the coolant from an old jug in the back. His movements were slow but precise, and every gesture told a story of decades spent under hoods and engines. "I'm Gus," the man finally said, wiping his hands on a rag. "Keanu," he replied, offering a hand. "Pleasure," Gus said, shaking it firmly. The car rumbled to life on the first try. "She'll get you where you're going," Gus said. "But you'll want to get her checked properly in town. There's a shop about 20 miles that way." He pointed east. "Owned by my nephew." Keanu reached for his wallet. "Let me pay you for your time." Gus shook his head. "Don't insult an old man's hobby. Helping someone out on the road isn't something you charge for." Keanu smiled, touched by the man's humility. "At least let me buy you lunch," Keanu offered. But Gus waved him off again. "Nah, son, you just pay it forward, all right? That's how we keep the world running." With a final nod, Gus climbed into his truck and drove away, disappearing into the heat haze like a mirage. Keanu stood there for a moment, engine humming, a strange warmth looming in his chest. He'd met a lot of people in his life, many who wanted something from him, many who saw only the fame. But Gus was different. He didn't recognize Keanu. He just saw a man in need. And something about that stuck. 1 week later, Keanu couldn't shake the image of Gus from his mind. Back in Los Angeles, his car now fully serviced, his schedule full with interviews, filming, and events, the encounter kept playing over in his head. Gus, oil-stained, sun-wrinkled, kind, a relic of a fading era. The kind of man who patched things up not because it was profitable, but because it was right. On the 7th morning, Keanu made a decision. He rescheduled his afternoon appointments, picked up the Mustang keys, and slipped out of the city without telling anyone where he was going. By late afternoon, he was back on that same stretch of desert road. This time, the car ran smoothly, its engine humming with gratitude. At a small gas station on the edge of a town called Troma, Keanu asked around. "You looking for old man Gus?" One of the attendants said. "He's not at the shop anymore. Retired. Lives a few miles up in the hills." The young man gave directions, and Keanu followed a winding, dusty road until he found a modest, weather-beaten house with a rusted truck parked outside. Keanu parked and stepped out, unsure of how he'd be received. He knocked gently on the door. A moment later, Gus opened it. His face lit up with recognition. "Well, I'll be damned. The Mustang guy." Keanu grinned. "You got a few minutes?" Gus gestured inside. "For you? Always." The quiet life of Gus Hammond. The air inside Gus Hammond's house was thick with memories. It smelled faintly of engine grease, old pine wood, and coffee that had been brewed in the same metal percolator for the last 2 decades. The place was modest, a one-story cabin-style home nestled quietly at the base of a dry, craggy hill that overlooked the small, unassuming desert town of Troma. Keanu stepped inside and instinctively removed his boots at the door. "Old habit?" Gus asked with a smile, motioning to a worn recliner. Keanu nodded, looking around. "My mother taught me. Respect the space." Gus gave an approving grunt. "Good woman, I'm guessing." "The best," Keanu said softly, his eyes scanning the photographs that lined the mantel above a wood-burning stove. There were black and white pictures of a young Gus in a military uniform, others with his late wife. Keanu assumed, smiling beside him, at various roadside diners and car shows. One photo caught Keanu's attention. Gus, much younger, stood beside a red Pontiac GTO, looking proud as a lion. "Your first car?" Keanu asked, nodding toward it. Gus chuckled. "Close. My first love, actually. Bought her from a junkyard with money I earned fixing bicycles. Took me 3 years to get her roadworthy. That car taught me everything I know." Keanu's face lit up with interest. "Still have it." "Traded her in for a hospital bill," Gus said quietly, and the smile faded from his face. "Back when my wife got sick." Keanu didn't pry. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "I haven't stopped thinking about our meeting," Keanu began. "You pulled over without hesitation. You didn't know who I was, didn't ask for anything. You just helped." "That's what folks used to do," Gus replied. "Doesn't seem all that special to me." "But it is," Keanu said. "You reminded me of something I hadn't felt in a long time. That kind of selflessness, it's rare." Gus reached for the percolator on the stove and poured 2 steaming cups. He handed one to Keanu. "So what brings you all the way back here? Surely it's not just for my stellar coffee." Keanu smiled, then took a deep breath. "I wanted to know your story, Gus. I know this might sound strange, but I think people need to hear it. There's something about you, about your life, that feels like it could teach people something." The old man chuckled. "Son, I'm just a retired grease monkey who never left his zip code." "You're a hero," Keanu said simply. "And the world needs more of those. The life left behind." Gus hesitated, looking into his cup for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, thick with emotion and buried pain. "I was born just down the road. My daddy ran a repair shop back in the 40s. Had 2 bays and a single lift, all hand-powered. He believed in honest work and handshake promises. My brothers went off to college. I stayed behind and took over the shop when he passed." Keanu listened intently, his eyes never leaving the older man's face. "I met Millie at the Sunday market. She was selling peach cobbler for the church. First bite, I was sold. On her and the pie. He laughed softly. We married young. Never had kids. Doctors told us we couldn't. But she was my world. We'd go to car shows, take long drives, talk about moving someday to Oregon or even Canada. But then, life happened. What do you mean? Keanu asked gently. Gus looked out the window. Millie got sick. Pancreatic cancer. I sold the shop, the Pontiac, everything to cover her treatments. Didn't save her. But I'd do it again in a heartbeat. There was a long silence. You ever love someone that deeply, son? Keanu nodded slowly, his voice quiet. Yeah, I did. And I lost her too. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the years between them disappeared. Two men, bonded not by fame or fortune, but by grief and the love that came before it. An unexpected offering. After a long moment of silence, Keanu stood and walked to the window. The desert stretched out beyond the house like an ocean of amber, shimmering in the last rays of sunlight. Then he turned back toward Gus. I have a proposal. Oh, Gus raised an eyebrow. Keanu walked over to a leather bag he had set beside the door. He pulled out a black folder and handed it to Gus. Inside was a handwritten letter and a small packet of documents, official-looking ones. What's this? Gus asked, flipping through. It's from me, Keanu said. And a few friends I called in. I wanted to repay you, but not with cash. That felt wrong. So instead, I made some calls. We found your old Pontiac. The exact one. Gus froze. Keanu nodded. It's being restored by a group of vintage car specialists in Leh. Should be ready in a few weeks. I'd like to drive it back here, personally. Gus stared at him, speechless. And there's more, Keanu continued. That shop you sold. The building is still there. Abandoned. I want to help you get it back. No strings, just because the world needs more places like that. The old man swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly. I don't know what to say, he whispered. Say you'll let me do it, Keanu replied. Because I think what you gave me on that road deserves more than a thank you. It deserves to be remembered. Honored. A silent room. A beating heart. Gus sat down, slowly, his hand covering his mouth. His eyes, now glistening, blinked rapidly as if trying to stop a dam from breaking. My whole life, he whispered, I've tried to live by one simple rule. Leave a place better than you found it. That's all. I never wanted praise. Never thought I deserved it. You do, Keanu said firmly. You always did. A long pause filled the room. Outside, the wind stirred the desert dust, carrying with it the quiet sound of possibility. Then, Gus chuckled, brushing his eyes. You Hollywood folks, always making big gestures. Keanu smiled, the lines in his face deepening. Some things are worth the effort. The return of something beautiful. By the time Keanu left that evening, the two men had shared stories, tears, and laughter. Gus stood on the porch as the Mustang rumbled down the hill, watching the taillights vanish into the night. He held the folder to his chest, like a sacred relic, unable to comprehend the kindness he'd just been shown. It had been years since he felt seen, truly seen. And in just one visit, KeanuReeves had managed to return something far more valuable than a car. He had returned dignity, hope, and the reminder that kindness, no matter how small, ripples out in ways we can't always see. The garage that time forgot. 3 weeks later, in a quiet alley of Trona, California, a place that hardly ever made it on maps or travel blogs, a forgotten garage stirred with life once again. The wind rolled in low and slow from the west, lifting red dust and memories in equal measure. Birds scattered from rusted lamp posts as a flat truck backed into the narrow driveway of what was once Hammond's Auto, its faded sign barely clinging to the side of the weather-worn building. Standing in front of it all was KeanuReeves, dressed in a simple flannel shirt, dusty jeans, and boots. His sunglasses reflected the skeleton of the structure before him. The brick walls were cracked. The garage doors creaked like tired bones. Vines had crept into corners, and spiderwebs painted silver murals in the broken windows. But Keanu didn't see decay. He saw promise. And beside him, eyes wide with disbelief, stood Gus Hammond. "I haven't seen this place in over 15 years, Gus said, his voice a whisper wrapped in awe. "Feels like visiting a ghost." Keanu turned to him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Then let's give it a soul again." The blueprint of the past. Inside the garage, time had stood still. Old parts lay scattered on shelves that sagged with age. A rusted coffee can full of mismatched bolts sat beside a cracked photograph of Gus and Millie. Her smile was warm, unshaken by time. On the far wall, in bold red letters faded by the years, were the words, "Honest work. No exceptions." Keanu stepped through it all slowly, almost reverently. "I've brought in a crew," he said. "Folks who specialize in restorations, old garages, diners, theaters. They're good people, and they're not charging you a dime." "I don't know what to say," Gus said, his voice shaking. Keanu looked around. "Say you'll help design the new floor plan. We're not just restoring the building. We're bringing back your legacy." Gus swallowed hard and nodded, his eyes misting over. "All right, let's do it." The restoration begins. Within days, the once quiet alley echoed with the sounds of hammers, drills, and laughter. Local volunteers, many of them younger mechanics and apprentices from nearby towns, showed up just to shake Gus's hand and ask if they could help. Word had spread that KeanuReeves was in town, sure, but the real buzz was about the garage and the man behind it. Gus, reluctant at first, quickly came alive. He wore his old coveralls again, patched at the knees, stained with memories. He taught the young volunteers how to rebuild carburetors, identified faulty gaskets by sound, and used nothing but feel to thread a bolt in blind. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert in gold, Keanu and Gus sat on the back steps of the garage, sharing a cold drink and listening to the distant sound of tools still clinking. "You were made for this," Keanu said. "I forgot what it felt like," Gus replied, eyes watching the horizon. "To matter. You've always mattered." A letter in the attic. The next morning, while clearing out the attic of the garage, Gus made a startling discovery. Behind a false panel in the old office wall, tucked inside a tin lunchbox wrapped in faded flannel, lay a collection of old letters. They were addressed to A.M. Reeves. Gus froze. A.M. Reeves. "That name sounds familiar," he muttered, walking down to where Keanu was overseeing the renovation crew. Keanu looked up from a blueprint and wiped his hands on a rag. "What's up?" Gus held up the bundle. "Found these hidden in the attic. You should take a look." Keanu took the letters, carefully unwrapping the flannel. As he read through the first page, his brow furrowed. His eyes moved rapidly over the handwriting. Neat, sharp, with small ink smudges that hinted at tears. A long silence passed. Then he looked up, stunned. "These are from my father." Gus blinked. "Your father?" Keanu nodded. "I haven't seen him since I was 6. He left my mother and me. We never heard from him again." Gus sat slowly on an overturned crate. "Then why were his letters in my garage?" The question hung in the air, heavy with years of unknown history. Keanu flipped to the last letter in the bundle. It was dated over 3 decades ago. The final letter. "Dear Gus, I know I failed you. I know I failed everyone. But I had to protect them. I had to disappear. If anything ever happens to me, and my boy comes looking, I need you to tell him everything. You're the only one I trust with the truth. His name is Keanu. Tell him I'm sorry. Tell him I loved him more than my own life. A.M. Reeves." Keanu's hands trembled slightly. "He knew you. You knew him." Gus looked shaken. "I didn't remember. Not until now. A.M. Reeves. He came through here once, on a Harley. Said he needed help, but couldn't leave a trail. He told me just enough to know he was running from something or someone. said his boy would be famous one day. Keanu closed his eyes. And he was right. The truth beneath the dust. That evening, under a wide desert sky, Gus sat with Keanu around a campfire they built behind the garage. "I wish I remembered more," Gus said, "but I remember his eyes. Same as yours." Keanu looked into the fire, the flickers dancing in his gaze. "Do you think he meant what he wrote?" he asked quietly. "I think he loved you," Gus replied. "And he made mistakes, but he wanted to fix them. Sometimes. That's all a man can do." Keanu nodded, silent, absorbing the weight of a truth buried for decades. "Maybe this garage isn't just about cars anymore," Keanu finally said. "Maybe it's about reconnection, about second chances." Gus smiled. "You've got oil in your blood now, son. Welcome to the club." The Wall of Remembrance. Inspired by the letters, Keanu and Gus decided to dedicate one wall of the garage to the memories of those who had shaped them. Family, friends, mentors, even strangers who'd lent a hand when the world had been unkind. They called it the Wall of Remembrance. Keanu placed his father's final letter behind a glass frame. Gus mounted a photo of Millie, alongside a rusted wrench from their first repair job together. Soon, others followed. Locals brought photos of loved ones, fathers who'd taught them how to change a tire, mothers who'd driven them to college in broken-down cars, brothers lost in wars. The wall grew, and so did the meaning of the garage. It was no longer just a place for fixing engines. It became a sanctuary for healing hearts, secrets in the dust, and the visitor at dawn. Morning broke slowly over the desert town of Trona, where silence was no stranger. The sky burned orange and gold as sunlight spilled over the cracked pavement and rusted rooftops, washing the town in a soft, surreal glow. On the edge of town, at the site of a reborn legacy, Hammond's Auto stood proud again. The paint was fresh. The neon sign above the garage door blinked to life for the first time in over 15 years. Honest work. No exceptions. It was more than a slogan now. It was a heartbeat, a promise kept alive by two unlikely men bound by fate, pain, and purpose. Inside, Gus Hammond was already hard at work. His wrinkled hands were slick with grease, his posture bent but determined. He moved from station to station like a conductor, tuning an orchestra made not of strings and brass, but pistons and steel. Keanu, nearby, wore his own set of coveralls now, faded navy blue with KeanuReeves stitched across the chest. The once hesitant celebrity had become a student of the garage, a listener of old engines and older stories. But today, their rhythm was about to be interrupted. Today, a stranger would arrive carrying not just questions, but a truth that had long been buried beneath the dust of time. The mystery of Reeves. The night before, Keanu had stayed up late, seated at the desk in Gus's rebuilt office. The letters from his father lay spread across the desk, illuminated by a small desk lamp that hummed quietly in the dark. Each letter had been dated, and each told fragments of a man Keanu barely remembered, a father whose voice was now just a shadow in the back of his mind, a man whose past was hidden in layers of secrecy and sorrow. There were mentions of places: Taipei, Bangkok, San Diego. And there were warnings. One line in particular had been underlined 3 times in shaky ink. "If they find me, they'll use you to get to me." Keanu stared at it for a long time. What had his father been running from? Who were they? And why had he trusted Gus, a man from a quiet desert town, to carry the truth? A visitor arrives. At 7:04 a.m., just as the first car rolled into the shop for a tune-up, a sleek black sedan pulled up and parked across the street. It was starkly out of place in the town's dusty palette, shiny, corporate, like a foreign object that didn't belong. The door opened, and out stepped a woman. She was in her early 60s, tall, poised, with sharp cheekbones and eyes that scanned the garage like a hawk. She wore a tailored blazer over dark jeans and had a worn leather bag slung across her shoulder. Keanu noticed her immediately. She didn't look like someone who needed her oil changed. She looked like someone on a mission. "Can I help you?" he asked as she approached. She took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that had clearly seen too much of the world. "I'm looking for Gus Hammond," she said. Keanu turned and waved Gus over. "Someone here for you." Gus emerged from under the hood of an old Buick, wiping his hands on a rag. He took one look at the woman and froze. "Eleanor," he whispered. The woman nodded slowly. "It's been a long time, Gus." Keanu looked between them, eyebrows raised. "You two know each other." Gus's voice was low, cautious. "More than you know." Eleanor's truth. They gathered in the garage office, where the scent of oil mixed with fresh coffee. Eleanor sat across from Gus, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug, eyes distant. "I worked with your father, Keanu," she began. "Years ago, back when we were both part of a project under the Defense Intelligence Agency. He was one of our best field analysts. Smart, moral, deeply troubled by what he saw. When he tried to expose internal corruption, things happening overseas, he became a target." Keanu's jaw tightened. "My mother never knew," he said. "She thought he abandoned us." Eleanor nodded. "He didn't. He was told to disappear, for your safety." He kept writing. "But after a few years, even I lost track of him." Gus leaned back in his chair, stunned. "So when he came to me, he was already running," Eleanor confirmed. "He trusted you because he remembered the stories your wife wrote about in the local newspaper. You were the honest man with the honest shop." Keanu looked down at the letter again, the line echoing in his head. "You're the only one I trust with the truth." Eleanor opened her bag and handed Keanu a folder. Inside were declassified documents, grainy photographs, and a copy of his father's final mission file, marked redacted in thick black lines. "He died in Bangkok," she said quietly. "We only got confirmation 2 years ago. He saved lives, but history will never know his name." Keanu's throat tightened. "And now," Eleanor looked up, "now, you honor him, and you tell his story the way it should be told." The garage becomes a beacon. That afternoon, something shifted in the air around Hammond's auto. The crew worked with renewed energy. Locals stopped by not just for oil changes, but to drop off letters, stories, and old photographs. Each one a small thread in a tapestry that Gus and Keanu were slowly stitching together. The wall of remembrance grew taller. Keanu added a new frame, this time a scanned image of his father's old ID badge. Gus added a photo of Eleanor and Millie from a 4th of July barbecue long ago. Even Eleanor, moved by the unfolding story, chose to stay in Trona a little longer. "I'm not ready to leave," she told Gus. Too many ghosts still lingering. A shared purpose. That night, Gus and Keanu sat under the stars again, this time joined by Eleanor. The desert stretched around them like a quiet ocean. The stars above blinked steadily, as if they too were watching this small, powerful story unfold. "We started this with a broken car," Keanu said, smiling. Gus laughed. "Now look at us, garage mechanics, history diggers, and ghost hunters." Keanu turned to Eleanor. "Do you regret not telling us sooner?" She looked into the fire. "I regret a lot, but not this. Not being here." A silence settled among them, peaceful, reverent. In that moment, none of them were just people anymore. They were keepers of memory, guardians of truth, and unexpected companions on a road that was never meant to be walked alone. The grand reopening and the eyes of the world. The desert town of Trona hadn't seen this kind of commotion in decades. Children chased each other across the sidewalk with ice cream cones in hand. Old-timers leaned on their canes and reminisced about the good old days. Local bands tuned guitars and ukuleles behind the firehouse while the scent of barbecue filled the air. Even the cacti seemed to stand taller, as if they too sensed something special was happening. It was the grand reopening of Hammond's auto, and somehow the entire town had become a part of the story. But none of it had been orchestrated by Hollywood PR teams or crafted by slick marketers. This wasn't some Netflix drama. It was real. And at the center of it all stood Gus Hammond in his grease-stained coveralls, and Keanu Reeves, wearing a baseball cap low over his eyes, trying his best to blend in, but failing, of course. What began as a stranded car on a desert road had transformed into a resurrection of a legacy, the rediscovery of a family's forgotten truths, and the rekindling of hope for an entire town. But with revival often comes attention, and not all of it good. The morning spotlight. A few days before the reopening, a white SUV pulled into the lot. Out stepped a young woman with a determined look in her eyes and a press badge clipped to her belt. Amelia Ruiz, The Observer, Los Angeles Bureau, she said, holding out her hand to Keanu. He blinked. The Observer. One of the few newspapers that still prints on real paper, she joked. I heard about the restoration project. Thought it was just a fluff piece until I saw the photos of the Wall of Remembrance. And then the letters from your father. I had to see this for myself. Keanu glanced at Gus, who was watching from a few feet away with wary eyes. We're not trying to make this a circus, Keanu said gently. I'm not here for a tabloid scoop, Amelia assured him. This isn't TM's. I want to write something real. About the garage. About Gus. About what this place stands for. Keanu studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. One condition. Name it. You tell the story right. This isn't about me. It's about Gus. The story that found its soul. Over the next few days, Amelia shadowed the men at the shop. She watched Gus train two teenagers on brake systems using only their ears and instincts. She sat with Eleanor as she quietly read through more of the letters from Keanu's father. She helped Keanu repaint the last section of the garage's back wall, now home to names submitted by families from across the country. By the end of the week, she had a notebook full of pages, a voice recorder filled with laughter and tears, and a heart heavier than she expected. This place, she said one night as the sun dipped low, isn't just a garage. It's a cathedral of character. Gus chuckled. Haven't heard that one before. Amelia smiled. It's where dignity came to retire, and was convinced to stay a while longer. The day the world showed up. On the morning of the grand reopening, dozens of locals arrived early, but they weren't the only ones. Word had spread, faster than anyone had expected. A famous chef from San Diego who read the Observer article arrived with a food truck, serving free meals. A veterans group from Nevada rolled up on motorcycles, each man wearing patches commemorating lost friends whose names now adorned the Wall of Remembrance. A father and daughter drove from Oregon, bringing with them the carburetor from the man's late father's 1957 Chevy Bel Air. He taught me how to rebuild it using one of your columns in the old Motor Weekly, he told Gus, who'd forgotten he ever wrote for the magazine. And then there were the cameras. Local news vans, a podcast crew, independent filmmakers, even a small Netflix documentary team that had gotten wind of the story. Keanu sighed when he saw them. So much for flying under the radar. Gus elbowed him gently. You knew this was gonna happen, Hollywood. I hoped it wouldn't, Keanu said. But maybe it needed to. Fame finds Gus. By midday, Gus had given 7 interviews, shaken over 100 hands, and posed for more pictures than he had in his entire life. A local school principal handed him a letter signed by 73 students. Thank you for reminding us what a hero looks like, it read. Another man approached, a businessman from Sacramento. I own 3 auto shops, he said. I want to franchise Hammond's Auto. I think what you've built here, honest work, no exceptions, it can inspire a whole generation. Gus blinked, stunned. Franchise? Me? The man smiled. You don't have to run it. Just lend your name. Your values. Let us build it right. Gus turned to Keanu later and said, What do I even do with all of this? Keanu smiled. Whatever you want. You earned it. When the spotlight blinds. But not everyone was thrilled with the sudden fame. Two of the original volunteers who helped rebuild the garage began arguing over recognition, who should get credit for the restored paintwork or the hydraulic lift. One even posted on social media, accusing the project of being a celebrity ego trip. The post went viral. "People see what they want," Eleanor told Keanu when he showed her the phone. "But you know the truth. So does Gus." "I just hate that he's caught in it," Keanu murmured. But Gus had spent a lifetime keeping quiet in a noisy world. He wasn't about to let the internet tell him who he was. That evening, as the crowds cleared and the neon sign buzzed above the garage, Gus stepped onto a makeshift stage and tapped the microphone. He spoke with no script, just heart. The speech that went viral. "You don't fix an engine with noise," Gus said, his voice calm. "You fix it with patience, with time, with care. Same goes for people." He paused, looking out over the gathering. "I'm no saint. I'm no genius. I'm just a guy who never stopped believing in rolling up his sleeves and showing up for someone who's stranded, whether that someone's a stranger or Keanu Reeves." The crowd laughed. He continued, "I didn't fix a car. I found a friend. I found family. I found out that even after losing everything, life can still surprise you with a second wind." And then, looking directly into the camera lens of a streaming phone, he added, "And if you're out there feeling forgotten, broken, or too old to matter, listen to me, kid. You're not. Your story's still being written." The clip went viral overnight. That night, under the stars. Later that evening, as the town faded back into stillness, Gus, Keanu, and Eleanor sat around the now familiar fire pit. The embers glowed orange, matching the horizon. "It's all happening so fast," Gus said. Keanu nodded. "The truth always echoes loudest when it's real." "I just wanted to fix a car," Gus chuckled. "And you ended up fixing lives," Eleanor said quietly. Keanu looked to the wall of remembrance, where flickering candles had been placed beneath several of the names. "You changed the world without ever leaving your zip code." Gus didn't reply. He just leaned back, stared at the stars, and smiled. The woman with the sky in her eyes. The stars were still out when the knock came. It was just past 5:30 a.m. in Trona. The town was wrapped in that brief silence between night and dawn, where even the wind seemed to tiptoe across the desert sand. At Hammond's Auto, the garage slept peacefully, its neon sign humming a low, steady glow. The world had gone quiet again after the noise of the grand reopening. Quiet, but not still. Gus Hammond, rising early out of habit more than necessity, opened the door wearing his thick flannel robe, expecting maybe a delivery or an early bird mechanic. But it wasn't a delivery. It was her. She stood in the golden spill of porch light, clutching a small duffel bag. Her silver hair fell in soft waves down her back, and though her face was older than when he'd last seen it, the eyes were the same. They were the color of early morning sky. Blue, quiet, full of stories. Gus's breath caught in his throat. "Mary." Her lip trembled, and for a moment, neither of them said a word. Then she nodded. "Hey, Gus." The ghost he never expected. Inside the garage office, coffee steamed in mismatched mugs, untouched. Mary sat with her hands in her lap, staring at the floor as Gus stood near the window, trying to collect the storm of emotions swelling in his chest. "You look just like I remember," he said softly. She gave a sad smile. "You look older, but only on the outside." He let out a breath. "I thought you moved away. For good." "I did," she said. "But I never stopped watching. Not really." "Why now?" Mary reached into her bag and pulled out a worn envelope. She slid it across the desk. It was addressed to Millie Hammond. Gus froze. His late wife's name, written in a familiar looping cursive. "Where did you get this?" "She wrote it to me," Mary said, "before she passed. I was supposed to come back and give it to you. I couldn't. Not then." With trembling fingers, Gus opened the letter. Millie's final words. Dear Mary, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. And that you've come back when Gus needs you most. I want you to know I forgive you. I always did. Life has a funny way of turning good people into strangers when they let pride get in the way. Gus loved you like a sister, and so did I. What happened was tragic, but blame has no home here. I want you to help him remember who he is. I want you to help him live again. Tell him I love him. And tell him it's okay to forgive the past. Millie. Tears spilled silently down Gus's cheeks. Mary's eyes welled too, but she didn't speak. She just waited. Gus sat down heavily in the chair across from her. Why did you leave? Mary swallowed hard. Because I thought I ruined everything. The wound beneath the wrench. It was nearly 30 years ago. Back when Hammond's Auto was still bustling and Gus was the quiet king of the town's under-the-hood kingdom. Millie was writing a column for the local paper, and Mary, her younger cousin, was visiting for what was supposed to be a short stay. But the stay turned into months, and somewhere along the line, emotions blurred. A night of grief, a moment of vulnerability, and a single mistake. Mary and Gus shared something they never meant to. A kiss. Nothing more, but enough to shatter trust. When Millie found out, she was heartbroken. She never screamed, never raged. She simply asked Mary to leave, and Mary did. No one ever spoke of it again. Until now. I didn't fight for forgiveness, Mary said softly, because I didn't think I deserved it. Gus looked at her, the weight of decades in his eyes. I buried it so deep, I forgot where I left it. Keanu's quiet entrance. Keanu walked into the office sometime after 6 a.m., rubbing sleep from his eyes. He paused when he saw them sitting there. The tension, the emotion, the history thick in the air. Should I come back later? He asked carefully. Gus shook his head. No, come in. Mary stood, her voice gentle. You must be Keanu. He offered a small smile. I've heard a lot about you. She smiled, a little sadly. I imagine not all good. No, Keanu said, but all human. Mary blinked. Then she looked at Gus. I'll go check into the motel. You're not going anywhere, Gus said firmly. Not until we've had time. Proper time. She looked at him, uncertain. Millie wanted me to forgive, he said. And maybe I'm ready. For the first time since arriving, Mary's shoulders eased. She gave a small nod and sat back down. Keanu, quietly respectful, stepped out to give them space, but the seeds of a new chapter had been planted. The past, unearthed. Over the following days, Gus and Mary spent hours walking through old memories, sometimes in silence, sometimes in cathartic release. They sifted through boxes Millie had packed away, photos, tapes, letters, old Super 8 reels of trips and birthdays, and long-forgotten drives to nowhere. One tape in particular stood out. It was labeled Last Words, Millie. Gus loaded it into the dusty old VCR. The footage was grainy, flickering, but there she was, Millie, sitting in her favorite chair by the window, the sunlight kissing her face. If you're watching this, it means I'm gone, and that's okay. I had a beautiful life, but I want you to promise me something, Gus. Don't live in the shadows of regret. Love again. Laugh again. Fix the things that matter, not just engines. And if Mary ever comes back, forgive her, because forgiveness is the last gift I can give you. The tape ended. The room was silent, but everything had changed. Eleanor's concern. Meanwhile, Eleanor had grown wary of the growing attention on the garage. A producer from Los Angeles had offered a full docuseries. Keanu's agent had flown in unexpectedly with contracts. It's getting noisy, Eleanor said. This place started as a whisper. I don't want it to become a shout. Keanu nodded. I've been thinking the same thing. Then what's next? He looked around the shop. Young mechanics working, Gus laughing, Mary sweeping the floor, the neon humming above them. I think it's time for me to step back. Eleanor tilted her head. Leave? He nodded slowly. But not forever. I need to go find the rest of my father's trail. Eleanor, I think I need to finish the story. For him. For me. And for Gus. I think he'll understand. The letter left behind. On the morning of Keanu's departure, Gus found a letter on his workbench. It was folded neatly beneath a wrench. Gus. When we met, I was stranded in more ways than one. You didn't just fix my car. You fixed something deeper. I came to thank you. I stayed to remember what humanity looks like. And I leave to chase down the rest of the story I never got to finish. You are a father to more than engines. And to me, you'll always be more than a mechanic. I'll be back. That's a promise. Keanu. The final spark. A goodbye that feels like a beginning. The sun was just beginning to fall behind the hills when the familiar growl of an engine echoed down the main road of Trona. It was low, deep, like a voice long silenced but never forgotten. People turned their heads, ears perked at the sound. It was unmistakable. Raw. Beautiful. Nostalgic. And then they saw it. A 1969 Pontiac GTO, cherry red, gleaming like it had been reborn from fire. It rolled slowly down the street and turned into Hammond's auto like it had known the way all along. Behind the wheel sat Keanu Reeves, sunglasses reflecting the golden light, a soft smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. Standing in the garage bay, Gus Hammond froze mid-step, his breath caught in his chest. No way, he whispered. Mary, beside him, covered her mouth, eyes wide. Keanu stepped out of the car and leaned against the door casually. I believe this once belonged to a certain 16-year-old bike repairman who fell in love with a junkyard treasure, Keanu said. Gus stepped forward slowly, like he was dreaming. He ran his hand along the hood, his fingers trembling. This is her, he said, voice thick with emotion. This is my car. Keanu nodded. The original VN, restored from the ground up. It took some digging. She passed through 5 states, 3 owners, and nearly got scrapped. But I made a promise. Gus blinked, swallowing hard. Why? Why would you do this? Because you gave me something I thought I'd never have, Keanu said. A piece of my past. A truth. A home. It was time I gave you something back. The whole town gathers. Word spread quickly. People abandoned dinner tables. Shops closed early. Kids ran barefoot across the street just to see the spectacle. By twilight, nearly the whole town had gathered outside the garage. Keanu and Gus stood beside the GTO, framed in orange light. Someone started clapping. Then more joined, until the entire street echoed with applause, not for a celebrity, but for 2 men who had reminded the world what mattered: compassion, dignity, and never turning away from a broken thing. Be it a car, a person, or a past. A young girl from the crowd stepped forward and handed Keanu a folded sheet of paper. He opened it, smiled. It was a drawing of Gus, Keanu, the garage, and a giant heart above it. He bent down and whispered, "You've got a gift. You know that." She beamed and skipped back to her family. The final chapter of his father's story. Later that night, under the stars that had become their witness to so much, Gus, Mary, Eleanor, and Keanu sat around one final fire. The desert was cool, and the sky was impossibly wide. Keanu pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal. "I found it in Bangkok," he said. "An old contact of my father's kept it safe. Took me weeks of searching, but I found his story." The journal contained sketches, names, locations, fears, pages filled with maps and memories. Keanu read aloud from the last entry. "If Keanu ever reads this, I want him to know that I never stopped loving him. Not once. And that I never regretted choosing to keep him safe, even if it meant disappearing. If I'd done one thing right, let it be that I gave my son a world where he could become the man I never had the courage to be." Keanu closed the journal. Gus put a hand on his shoulder. He'd be proud. Keanu nodded, eyes glassy. He helped me find my way home, even after he was gone. A letter from the heart. The next morning, pinned to the garage door, was a handwritten note addressed to the town of Trona. To everyone who helped make this place whole again, thank you. This garage started as a rescue mission for a broken car, but it became something far more valuable, a repair shop for the human spirit. To Gus, thank you for the wrench, the wisdom, the unwavering belief in doing what's right. To Mary, for reminding us that the past can hurt, but it can also heal. To Eleanor for keeping secrets safe and revealing truths when it mattered most. And to this town, for proving that fame is nothing next to integrity, and kindness never goes out of style. I'm going back to the world now, but I'll carry Trona with me wherever I go. KeanuReeves. The letter was framed and placed next to the wall of remembrance, where it still hangs today. 1 year later, Trona has changed, but not too much. The garage is still open, but it now operates as a hybrid community mentorship center and repair shop. Young mechanics come from across the state to learn from Gus. Mary runs a small bookstore in the adjacent lot called Second Chances. Eleanor helped write and publish a memoir, Under the Hood, How a Garage, a Star, and an Old Mechanic Fixed the World One Bolt at a Time. Keanu. He visits every year. No cameras, no entourage, just a man in jeans and a cap who pulls into town, shares a beer with Gus, reads a book under Mary's favorite tree, and sometimes slips out before anyone even knows he was there. But the town always knows. They remember the day Trona found its spark again. Not because of a celebrity, but because of a broken-down car, an honest man, and the road that brought them together.